the ULEX talks. Today, the focus and the topic will be the role and sustainability of service providers for victims of gender-based violence, and how to advance the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. I will just repeat again the technical details. Please, for those Serbian, Albanian speaking, you may join and talk on by going on the Serbian or English or Albanian channel. I will give the floor to Chiara. She will introduce the speakers, and let's have an interesting conversation.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today to talk about such an important topic, mainly the pivotal and the vital and essential role played by service providers in the protection and support to victims of gender-based violence. I'm very honored to be joined today by amazing speakers. First of all, Mr. Basri Castrati, thank you for joining us. Basri has been the head of the Victim Advocacy Office within the Chief State Prosecutor Office since 2013. And he also has extensive knowledge in being a trainer for domestic violence and trafficking in human being cases at the Police Academy in Wood Street. And also knowledge, he also has experience with International Red Cross and Save the Children. Thank you, Basri, for joining us today. Then we have Vesna. Hi, Vesna. Vesna Stajic is the head of Women's Center for Support and Development in Novo Bordo, the very first multi-ethnic shelter in Kosovo, and it engages in the daily delivery of all-around support services to victims, including support therapy with psychologists, as well as training and workshop for women. Thank you, Vesna, for joining us today. And then Tiana Simic-Lavalli, sorry, your surname. Tiana is a sociologist by profession, and she's currently the program director of Women's Rights NGO, an NGO which offers counseling, psychological, and legal assistance to victims of gender-based violence, not only in North Mitrovica, but also in other municipalities like Gračanica and Strete. Thank you, Tiana, for joining us. I will start, I'm planning to ask all of you 3 questions, the same questions, and then yeah, we're really looking forward to have this interaction with you on such an important topic. Few months ago, we saw the landmark moment of inclusion of the Istanbul Convention in the Kosovo Constitution, and it was really interesting that this happened right when there was and there is still the pandemic ongoing. As we all know, the convention puts a big focus on the role of general and specialist service providers and the need for having an holistic and coordinated approach. So my question will be, many countries report on the problem of enough financial support to services, and also the lack of this coordinated approach. Do you also face the same challenges? What are the challenges you face and your needs? I will start from you, Basri. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for this given opportunity to discuss this very sensitive issue, such as domestic violence. Of course, I am part of the overall judicial system of Kosovo, and the challenges are more or less similar, if not the same. But comparing to NGOs, we as an institutional mechanism operate within the Office of State Prosecutor, and we are a mechanism representing the interests of victims of crime in the system of justice, with particular emphasis on the victims of gender-based or domestic violence. In this regard, the budget is not really an issue or a problem because we have a particular item within this budget of the state prosecutor. On the other hand, Kosovo has moved ahead and made progress in terms of protecting the rights of victims. This, in addition to being a professional engagement, it's also a noble involvement and engagement for all of us that does not only look into the legal aspect of these developments or these issues, but it has also a human component in it. Recently, you have also mentioned that the Constitution of Republic of Kosovo has been enriched also with the adoption of the Constitutional Amendment 126, based on which the Istanbul Convention becomes part of the most superior legal act of Kosovo. It becomes part of the Kosovo's constitution. In a way, it gives us more opportunity and possibility to implement the rights of these categories of victims, and we are embracing the pace of other countries in terms of implementing the Istanbul Convention, which not only looks into the domestic violence, but also gender-based violence as a rather broader concept. The Office for Protection of Victims will need to develop some legislative acts just because the Istanbul Convention has been enshrined into our constitution. And in the future, we are going to use these tools and instruments to promote ourselves professionally, but also in terms of financial support of the office, as in order to have as professional staff, finances would be commensurate to this goal. So in this regard, we would still need some support by the relevant institution. Promises were made, but practically this has not been the case yet. Regardless of the material situation in our office and in other institutions, victims were never left without support. Not a single case that we dealt with was not supported. So always we try to cover them with our support in all of the prosecution offices. This communication in this format on 25th of November, when this campaign, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, is beginning, will make us more responsible. All of the stakeholders that are part of the system will be much more responsible in spreading out the communication so that none of the cases would be suffering because of negligence of the institutions of the relevant authorities that are in charge of providing such support. Perhaps for the beginning, that would be all from my side, and I stand ready to respond to any questions or queries and also participate in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Basri. Thanks a lot, especially because you gave us quite positive messages. So it's good to know that although there is still need for much support from your side, but still things are progressing. And it's really remarkable the work that you do in supporting constantly victims. Vesna, maybe the same question to you. What are the challenges you face as a shelter and your needs, and what can you tell us? Thank you.
Pozdrav Chiara, pozdrav svima. Nadam se da se čujemo.
Hello Chiara, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. I know you can't see me. As you already said, we are the first multi-ethnic shelter in Kosovo and the first in a region with a majority of Serbian population. Our aim as a shelter is to provide safe accommodation for the victims, provide RSOS line services, rehabilitation and reintegration programs. We were unlucky to start 13 days before the emergency situation and the health in Kosovo, so on the 1st of March, because we've only been licensed in the beginning of the year. So we've faced many challenges, if I may say so. In our work, we were helped by our colleagues from other safe houses in Kosovo, and including Tiana and the Women's Rights, and other women's NGOs that have been trying hard during the last 10 years to open one such institution in a region with majority Serbian population and provide services to the victims whose native language is not Albanian. What Mr. Basri already talked about the services provided by the victims' advocates. In our conversations with the women in the field who are potential victims of domestic violence, they say that they're very, very satisfied with the provision of the services of the victim advocates, and that this is one of the positive things regarding the protection from the violence, domestic violence. So let me move to some other challenges that are maybe common for all safe houses in Kosovo, and that is the lack of financial support. Standard operational procedures from 2013 define in detail the standards that an NGO should meet in order to be licensed to provide such social services. And it is a lot more in details than the law from 2010. Based on those procedures and standards, we are issued license. But later on, we don't receive enough financial support to realize our activities and use all the human and capacities we possess. That we have shown when we applied for the license. So the support, as much as it is not continued. We always have 2 to 3 months, depending on the approval of the budget of Kosovo, the allocation of grants. So we remain without funds, and we are not able to do what we are there for, what we want to do. So that is one of the problems, which is currently very current now. We are at the end of the fiscal year. There is no advertisements for call for applications. So we will again face those 2 to 3 months of a vacuum without budget, and let alone the problems we have because of the pandemic, because of the other way of working to which we have had to adopt, because we cannot have physical contacts. We can only work through online platforms, which is very, very difficult for women, especially in the rural areas, because they do not have technical possibilities to join us, to follow and participate on our discussions. And because only online format is now possible. This is why we tried to reduce those meetings with less women, of course, respecting all measures, health measures. We have managed to realize one part of our activities, planned activities, in order to show to women that we are there, we are present, and we can, even in such conditions, we still can continue providing the services they so need. The SOS helpline and the number 0800, we were allocated in the beginning of July, based on the decision from 2019. That was really quick, and since then we've had over 80 calls, which are not only related to psychological support and legal support, but they're also related to health issues, prevention, the possibilities for women, for economic empowerment. So we really do receive various questions and requests, and we do our best to meet all these requests so that those women don't feel that they're alone, left alone, and that nobody cares about them. That would be all from me for the beginning. We can continue talking.
Thank you, Vesna. Thanks a lot. I really liked how at the beginning of your answer, you also mentioned the good practice of cooperation with other safe houses and other NGOs, because this is what really we have to aim for, and it's in the spirit of the convention also, and that's the only way to effectively give our support to victims. So it was really nice to hear that. And of course, it's recurrent, the problem with financial sustainability, unfortunately, and although I guess there have been improvements during the years, but these keep on being a structural problem. And thank you for mentioning also the problem with outreaching to victims, because I will want to come back to this also a bit later as one of my questions. Before I give the floor to Tiana, I wanted to say if anyone has any questions, you can write it in the chat, and me and Alina will check, and we can collect all the questions for our speakers and have them at the end. Tiana, now the floor is yours. Same question. You being an NGO providing services, your challenges you face, your needs. Thank you.
Dobar dan svima.
Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon to all. Thank you, Chiara, for inviting me. Vesna already mentioned the problems with funds. These are the same problems for us as well. We, as an NGO that offers services to the victims since 2015, we have always been in this process of not having funds, do we have funds, and so on. Over 60% of our services are volunteer. And this is one of maybe our biggest problems with which we're dealing. I think Vesna already mentioned the problem of recognizing the diplomas and licensing. Vesna already mentioned it. So these are all some technical problems that are ongoing and it need to be solved in a longer period of time. Our very work is somewhere good and in cooperation with others. And as Vesna said, we rely on the support of each other in this sector, in the women's NGO sector, offering those services. So this cooperation is necessary and fundamental, really, for a proper approach to offering the services. We connected with Vesna during the pandemic and we developed a protocol for the victims from the north. And with the Women's Center, we also work with other NGOs, respectively with the Women's Center Ruka Ruci. We contacted lawyers who would help us support the victims from minority communities. We did a lot of work during the pandemics. We made this holistic approach to offering the services to the victims. I am very glad that I would gladly today praise our office in Mitrovica for victims protection, for all the services provided there. This office is next to none, really. It's the only institution that we have no objections to at all. I would really like to see all other institutions work like our Mitrovica office for the protection of victims, because they're doing their job extremely well. And we have extremely good cooperation with them when we're dealing with individual cases, especially regardless of the pandemic and obstacles. We have always had this contact and cooperation, and we always worked together on the cases. And I would like to stress this out. I would also like to thank ULEX, who before the pandemic and during the pandemic has always been there for us, available for us in dealing with individual cases and monitoring the work of institutions. That meant a lot to us. This support meant a lot to us, because as an NGO, regardless that the fact that the Istanbul Convention insists on recognizing and providing services and cooperation by the governmental institutions, NGOs are marginalized. We have a situation where the very topic of the gender-based violence is marginalized because of the mentality and the culture in Kosovo. Then we have the NGO sector, who is marginalized as well. So when we have the cooperation with the institutions where this is recognized and the service providers are aware of that, then we can see an efficient approach to cases. I believe that other problems except funds and non-recognition from of the NGO sector as a very important chain in preventing gender violence is that holistic approach. This is what I would maybe stress out. What we deal with in the north of Kosovo, the situation is always a bit different here. We always have to work in a bit different way. In comparison to the Women's Inclusion Center, which was established in line with Istanbul Convention and international principles and laws, in our region, the safe house, our safe house is led as a self-governance, really. This is something that we see as a problem because of the conflict of interest in this whole approach, as well as in the inadequate conditions. This is what we have been facing from 2015, since when we are offering our services. Which deal with offering services and raising awareness. This is something that I would maybe say for the beginning.
Thank you, Tiana. Thanks a lot. And I will actually connect to the second question from something you mentioned several times, the holistic approach. We know that this is exactly the approach that the Istanbul Convention calls for. And it calls, the convention calls for a comprehensive and coordinated approach to violence against women. So my next question to the three of you will be, how do you think the recent inclusion of the convention will foster the support to your work? How do you see the way forward, and in what concrete way the inclusion of the convention will help you in your work? I will start again from you, Basri. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much. And before I move on to this concrete specific question, let me not forget to thank my two colleagues, Vesna and Tiana, for their great work they do in their regional respective centers. And we also have this 24/7 hotline, support hotline, and we also inform other institutions. I have 3 leaflets here in English, Albanian, and Serbian, where we publish this information. This information can be found also in our website, the 24/7 hotline, to offer support counseling to the victims. And this line serves also to other actors to get information about the work of the victims, advocates, and where they can be found into a particular region. Now, with regards to the second question, I mentioned earlier that Istanbul Convention empowers us in the sense that it has become part of our supreme legal act of Kosovo, the constitution itself. And we are now working to amend and supplement the new law on domestic violence, which is going to fully reflect provisions of the Istanbul Convention, the coordination responsibilities, the responsibilities of victims, advocates and supporters, and also, as Diana mentioned, the psychosocial aspect of dealing with these cases. However, we should not forget that despite of us as an office have no mandate because we only represent the victims, we should not also neglect the offenders or the perpetrators of the crime, because they have to be treated psychologically and socially in order not to become abusers or repeated offenders. So in parallel to working with the victim, we should also be working with the offender so that there is a twin track approach. And once we have a coordination between the two opposing sides, the results will be evident. Another aspect is that our offices in all the regions have an excellent cooperation with the respective institutions and civil society organizations, be them shelters or others that are involved in the defense of the victims' rights. Oftentimes, I say it proudly as Basri, as head of this office, that it doesn't really matter whether our office or an NGO provides services, but what is much or utmost important is that the victim to be provided with these services. I'm not the one to be credited for any work, but the most important thing is for the victims to get services in the shortest possible time. And that goes for all of the institutions involved based on the responsibilities they have. So the victims should be provided with the services they need in a timely manner in the easiest possible way. One of the previous speakers said that we should be working more in coordinating between the central and local level, as with the local level, perhaps there is some stagnation. Centers for social work are at the local level, while the offices for victims advocates are at the regional, and maybe there is a lack of coordination here. New changes in terms of implementing the Istanbul Convention and also with the adoption of the new law on gender violence and domestic violence, and new standard operating procedures will be renewed to reflect the principles of the Istanbul Conventions, then it will be much easier for all of the partners, as they will have a clear description of their duties and legal obligations towards this vulnerable category with whom we've been working for 18 years now. According to the statistics that I have, in total, we have dealt with 18,000 cases, of which 15,000 are domestic violence cases. So it's been 18 years of work and so many cases that have been processed through our offices and getting services from us. Then they are handed over to other institutions and also the civil society organizations, either for shelter or socio and psychological counseling. The Istanbul Convention puts certain legal obligations on us, but also there is an economic component associated with it, the economic support to the victims, which was not sufficiently addressed in the previous domestic violence law. In Article 248 of the Criminal Code, this issue is mentioned briefly, but is not elaborated sufficiently. So now it is up to Kosovo's institutions to define it properly in the new law on domestic violence, to properly explain what domestic violence means, what psychological violence means, and other categories as well. So the inclusion of Istanbul Convention in the highest legal act will help us clarify so many other things, either regarding to primary legislation, but also to secondary and the standard operating procedure. All of the stakeholders, I hope, will find it easier to work and deliver services which would be provided timely to the victims. Every year, we organize this week on the rights of victims, and together with other partners, we try to raise the awareness on the rights of victims. This is the 11th year, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we could not organize some concrete activities. We did some online meetings or conferences, while Our aim is to reach out to every part of the territory of Kosovo to explain to the victims that services are there and we are ready to deliver those services. Now, despite of being organized in a regional setup, my feeling is that we have managed to cover all part of the all parts of the country. We have also a victims advocate from the Serbian community, but even during the time when there was none, we had on average 70 to 80 cases from the northern part of the country that were dealt with by us. So Aaron, Hatice, and Erhan, they were working in the area. They could speak the language, and now we have Elena who will work dealing with these cases. We are on the right track. The state prosecutor has offered the possibility for equal treatment of victims of all nationalities because for us, victim has no nationality. It's a victim regardless of the language they speak or understand. So we try to deliver and provide services equally to all of the citizens. There is no religious or language reference in terms of victims. The most important thing is we are together in this line and only together we can make it. Legislation is one part, while coordination with other institutions. When it comes to civil procedures, we also refer cases to free legal aid centers or other institutions that provide such services. So communication was not an issue because we've been working for 17 or 18 years now, and we have built a network of individuals and good communication, providing or aiming to provide best possible services to the victims. With the inclusion of the Istanbul Convention, we hope to further improve these services, and also we hope this will be a new drive or incentive for other stakeholders to continue to pursue this issue of providing support to victims. Another difficulty is the financial support, and efforts are being made with the government to bridge up this period between the old budget and new budget adoption, and with our joint effort, either civil society or others who are criticizing the institutions will make us much more responsible and take upon additional responsibilities to help this category. In this regard, as I say, we are in a good track, but due to the pandemic crisis, we could not work sufficiently on amendment of the law. I am part of the working group for drafting of the law on domestic violence, and I hope that pretty soon there will be a new law on domestic violence, which will be fully aligned with the Istanbul Convention. Additionally, and I am also part of a working group regarding the new law on compensation for victims, and we are going to include also compensation for victims of domestic violence, as the current legislation did not cover for any emergency support or aid to those victims. We are making amendments and supplements so that these victims have quick access to this type of compensation and not wait for the legal procedures to be completed. So I am part of the working group, which is led by Ministry of Justice. It is supported by US Embassy in Kosovo, and yesterday we had the last meeting of the group, so we are finalizing an initial draft which we hope will be much more advanced and accessible for victims to get support when they need it. Of course, we paid close attention to victims of violence, and the possibility of immediate compensation was restricted or limited by the previous law. Now, noting the experience on the ground, seeing the difficulties victims of domestic violence have, usually they don't seek for any compensation from the offender or perpetrator. They mostly are interested to get away from the perpetrator or offender in this case, and they don't really, or they are not usually interested for this compensation. But now this issue of compensation is going to be institutionalized, and it's going to be provided quickly to the victims. So this was a summary of my thought, and if I left anything unclear or open, I'm ready to further contribute.
Thank you, Basri. Thank you very much, because I think you gave us so many positive vibes on the way forward, and in what positive way the inclusion of the Istanbul Convention will change the path in Kosovo towards victims. So thanks a lot. And with this positive vibe, Vesna, same question to you. How do you see the inclusion of the convention will concretely impact on the current situation, especially on your situation as a shelter, the problem of financial sustainability that you mentioned? Thank you.
I say before, Vesna, because our chat was quite lively, and I think
sorry.
that we already exchanged some information.
Yeah.
And since Vesna, maybe you can explain or like reply to all of us whether how did you support the victims of domestic violence through online platforms or only face to face? Because I saw you answered already to Biljana, but maybe you want to answer also here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alina. I missed the chat.
No problem. That's why I'm here.
The floor is yours.
Pa evo, da prenesem ovo što smo pisali.
Let me transmit what we have written in the chat. Our services of advising through the hotline, in most of the cases, were offered through the phone connection. So these were phone calls. We did not have the conditions always for online platforms or online conversations. As you can see, our internet is not our best side. But we have had cases when the health measures were released a little bit, then with approval of the woman who called us, we organized that meeting. So we would love to have the conditions to hold these platforms online, but we have problems, and we never know how good our internet is and if we will be able to hold the conversation online. So in most cases, this was through the telephone calls, telephone conversations. And in some cases, we've had online conversations only when we had good internet connections, really. Regarding Chiara's second question, I would just like to remind you to the national strategy against domestic violence from 2016-2020, which already had recommendations and goals of the Istanbul Convention regarding the opening of a larger number of safe houses in a country, creating coordination mechanisms with all relevant institutions who can contribute to the fight against the domestic violence. Unfortunately, the national strategy was realized only 35%. Maybe this is what was missing, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, its inclusion in the constitution, and then that will enable the systematic solution of all these issues. And I really hope that it will be respected and responded to. So this big challenge, the implementation of Istanbul Convention standards and provisions, because that would mean an improvement for all the women, for all the actors dealing with the services, and it would change a lot our status, and we would be able to provide a more adequate and more wholesome services. I know that we have to work hard, that Kosovo is a young state and that there is a lot to be done in many other issues. This is a huge bite, if I may say, but we're all there to work together and help each other so that the Grevio report becomes positive and so that everything becomes okay. And so I hope that what Kosovo has accepted through this convention, that it will really be implemented in the field.
Si učinilo da se
Vesna, thank you very much.
I
because
just
you
thought
also...
you didn't hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, 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 I can hear. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, učinilo mi se na
Thank you very
trenutak da
much
se...
because you also give us very positive vibes about.
Hvalite.
Okay.
Is the translation okay, Emina? Okay. Okay. And Tiana, then
yes, translation is okay.
Super. Okay. Okay. So thanks again, Vesna, because like Basri, you also gave us very positive vibes and positive way ahead. And it's good to be hopeful, especially in this time of pandemics. And Tiana, same question to you from your NGO perspective. How can the inclusion of the convention concretely, support your work? Or how do you see the way forward? Thank you. You are muted. Huh? I think you're still muted. No, yes.
Okay. Ja se izvinjavam.
I apologize. The integration of the Istanbul Convention into the Constitution is a huge step for Kosovo, really, and we have waited for this for a long time, and we worked a lot on this. And it was a reason for celebration for all of us. What the convention enables, I will go back to that holistic approach. What the convention obliges the state to develop policies that will enable all the actors to participate in an adequate way in preventing violence against women. The state is obliged to make sure there are funds for the provision of all services. And another very important aspect of the convention is that the convention in continuity recognizes the work of the women's NGOs in prevention of violence against women and specifies this through various provisions. It obliges the state to support and to cooperate, to fully cooperate with all non-governmental organizations that work on preventing violence against women. So this is a huge step. So the fact that we have the convention now within the constitution, we can't say it's enough. What is good is that we can now say that we can now call on the Istanbul Convention and use this document as an argument, as a fact. But what can be problematic is that we in Kosovo have laws who have been standardized according to the principles of the Istanbul Convention, but which are not implemented in the field, unfortunately. This is concerning. So the question of how much will the Istanbul Convention be implemented and how what will be the approach to it? Will it all just remain on the paper, or will there be a strategy for the implementation of this very document? These are some of the questions to which we will devote more time in the future and insist on those. So this is a big step, but this is only one step on that road to realizing all or implementing all principles of the Istanbul Convention. The convention clearly defines the role of the central authorities, the local authorities, and also of the non-governmental organizations. And maybe this is the best part about it, that it clarifies what everybody should do, the mechanism of preventing the violence against women. What I see as very important is the role of the women's NGOs, which is mentioned in the Istanbul Convention as well. It is very important because they have this traditional fight they have traditionally fought and have this traditional expertise when we're dealing with preventing violence against women. So I am expecting that this feminist movement in Kosovo, or the women's NGOs, and the feminists from the very government and many other experts will do their best, will make efforts to implement this convention, of course, in cooperation with international organizations. Our laws are good, but the problem is that the laws are not being implemented here. And the Istanbul Convention obliges the state on changing the attitudes of people, on changing the attitudes of the very citizens of the state to devote to this issue. So there is a lot to be done, but there has to be a will. What we are currently facing, or the problem we're currently facing with the implementation of the laws, is the fact that the providers of the services have those patriarchal attitudes where gender-based violence is not seen as it is seen by the law. So there is this clash of views, and we go to those blaming to the fact that to saying that it is a private issue. The individual cases of violence against women, domestic violence, or any other form of violence against women cannot be solved unless every actor in the chain does their work properly. So all the institutions, all the actors have to join together, which is very important. We have to work a lot on raising the awareness of the very providers of the services, because we have to have this accountability. There is no responsibility and accountability of the service providers to do their job the way they are supposed to do it. So this is what we need to work more on in order to make sure the work will be efficient and adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiana. Thanks a lot for mentioning so many important aspects. So definitely the problem with implementation, effective implementation, this most likely will also be an issue with the provision from the Istanbul Convention. The role of women NGOs in the path toward implementation of the convention, definitely, and the feminist movement, changing attitudes. We need to start from there, definitely. And I just hope, reading from country reports to the Grevio communities during the years, we could actually see how we have witnessing improvements thanks to the accountability mechanisms of the convention. So the hope is that this will be, and is going to be the path also within Kosovo. My last question, you mentioned, all of you already mentioned the problem in outreaching to victims, especially now during the pandemic. There are so many challenges, and we know about this, in reaching out to victims from geographical location, rural areas, vulnerable groups. I'm just thinking about victims with disabilities, and now with the pandemic. So how can we better outreach to victims? What can be done also with the support from us, international organization, other organizations? What can we all do for a better outreach to victims? Thank you, Basri. Again, the floor to you.
Thank you, Chiara. And until now, I believe despite of our effort to reach out to every single victim, perhaps we may have omitted one or so in certain places or areas, and coordinated approach and effort activities like this one today through debates, talks, conferences, online events would be an additional support for the service providers to reach out to the victims, which found it perhaps difficult, especially during the pandemic times, to be able to access these services. So during this 16 days of activism campaign, I am sure all of us will be working to raise the awareness not only of the responsible institutions, but also on each and every individual involved. None of the institutions will be able to complete its task alone unless there is a coordinated effort with either NGOs or other institutions, organizations that are part of this national strategy against domestic violence and part of the standard operating procedures. So let us work together, being part of the mechanisms, and each one of us can contribute so that the public is best informed, so that we are closer to the victims and provide adequate services that each of our institution should provide. In an earlier meeting, when this law on compensation of victims was being approved, I said that every institution should put up visible information in terms of banners or other forms to display sufficient information about the services available and channels of communication or ways of approaching these services and service providers. But this did not materialize. We should work in enabling victims to see their basic rights in every institution they go, to include also legislation about compensation of victims and also provisions of legislation fighting domestic violence. So, despite of having organized those weeks for victims' rights, there is still a need to coordinate with all of the relevant stakeholders during these 16 days of activism. And Tiana rightfully mentioned that we do have a better legal instrument in our hand now, since the Istanbul Convention is part of the Constitution. So we have a stronger instrument, and based on, we are going to be assessed against the implementation of this instrument. This is going to have an impact on the institutions who should assume more responsibility, because at the end of the day, they will have to report on the implementation of the convention. So institutions should be working hard on the implementation of the requirements of the convention, and the performance of each of the institution is going to be measured. This will imply a better coordination between all of the actors so that we can reach out in every part of the territory of Kosovo and not to focus into these larger urban areas that should be supported by shelters, regional shelters or NGOs, and therefore we cover more of the territory. I've been working with Caritas, Ministry of Health, EULEX, OSCE, and all of those who were interested or who might be interested to be part of the similar talks and debates. I'm ready to participate so that we provide useful information for the victims when they need, because if and when they don't need such information, the situation is obviously better. But any potential victim, when such a situation or case happens, they should know where to knock or where to turn to. This implies that we should, in addition to implementing the provisions of the convention, we need to align and adjust our legislation. I hope that civil society organizations are going to be helpful. They were so cooperative until now. They pushed the institutions to do a better job. But again, let's unite our forces so that in addition to this educational or awareness raising part for the institutions, the victims are also provided with information for their easiest access to respective and relevant institutions. As I said in the beginning, I continue to be critical of the fact that we need to work in parallel both with the victims but also with the offenders so that they do not become repeated offenders and we don't see repeated cases of domestic violence. So in parallel to working with the victims, we need to work with the offenders because after a case is completed or solved and the person coming back to the society, they should be fully rehabilitated and integrated. And one of the key problems was long-term rehabilitation. We worked on a shorter-term rehabilitation, but there was obviously lack of work or effort on this longer-term rehabilitation. And that primarily goes to the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare, which was the lead agency according to the national strategy for rehabilitation. So we need to work more so that after all legal procedures, this longer term rehabilitation takes time so that the individuals go back to their lives and continue on their own. So again, I hope to have covered this part. And again, I stand ready for any questions if there are any.
Thanks a lot, Basri. Indeed, we need to unite forces and to work together. And indeed, long-term solution is what we have to aim to also. Vesna, same question to you, also from your perspective as a shelter, what can be done, what can we all do to better outreach to victims? I think you are muted, Vesna. I can see your microphone is muted.
Da li me sada čujete?
Now, yes.
Ok.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Vesna. Yes. Yes.
Stvarno, izvinite zbog ovih smetnji.
I apologize for these technicalities again.
Tu smo više za neke konkretnije akcije i
I'm sorry, I cannot hear that.
sada čujem prevod na engleski, ne znam.
Vesna, can you hear us?
Čujem. Aha, internet nam je zaista loš.
Okay, I heard some disconnections.
Smetnje da vas ne ometam.
Vesna says she will be short.
Okay.
We are more for some concrete actions and concrete ways to give information to potential victims and victims on the services that are available, where they can, who they can address, and how they can realize their rights if they are victims or potential victims, or if they need any other services. In these pandemic times and limited movement and health restrictions, I believe that social networks are maybe being abused, but this is for the moment the best way to ensure a constant message and information on where they can address their requests, what services are available, and that they're not alone, even in this time, that we will always find a way to help them regardless the restrictions, and that we inform them about the new way in which Kosovo wants to help. So the holistic approach against domestic violence, so that they know that there is a better legal perspective now, that they now have more opportunities, because we always wonder, both us and the victims, what after the safe house? This is a question to which we still do not have a proper response. The organizations that offer psychosocial support. We have psychotherapy offering. So coordinated offering of such services can provide better results than we would each individually be able to offer. As Diana said, Istanbul Convention provides many opportunities. Its inclusion in the Constitution and the changes in the legal framework and the implementation of all the laws will certainly motivate victims to report violence and leave the circle of violence. We, from individual discussions, conversations with our members and our volunteers and users of our services, we know that violence is there every day, every hour, every minute, and that we're only very active during the 16 days of activism, that we're not actually active only during those 16 days of activism, but throughout the whole year. So this is a constant fight, and we have to keep giving them more information so that they're better informed, so that they know what they can be offered. When they leave our shelter, they have questions, what next, where do we go? We have patriarchal mentality. We have some social norms that prevent our women to report the violence because they live in families with children. So the women truly need our support of us who deal with these issues, and they need the support of other women who are facing the same problems. They need to know that it all starts with them and ends with them if they do something on empowering themselves and increasing their self-confidence. We will support them and help them to remain on that level of awareness that they can manage their own life and that they do not depend on the violator and that they do not depend on the opinions of the environment. I really apologize if I were too long, but when you work with victims directly and when you see their fears, then you really, really have to have emotions. You cannot avoid that. So we definitely have to use the existing tools. I'm referring to social media networks, first of all these panel discussions and meetings, so that we in our own families and in our own environments, I'm sorry, I now can't hear, we keep emphasizing the fight against the violence, domestic violence, and that we have to be the example for our children, for our female and male children, so that girls should not endure violence and the boys should not be violent.
Thank you, Vesna. Thanks a lot also for these powerful messages. And definitely we have to empower each other. And I really like the reference to the leading by example. So if we start to have better implementation of laws, then victims will feel more comfortable in coming out and report. Tiana, the last word to you. How can we do a better outreach from your point of view?
Uglavnom, ovo što su prethodni sagovornici rekli.
What the previous talker said is raising awareness, outreach to victims in urban and rural areas. This is a very important aspect on which we have been working for years, especially the NGOs that are very active in these activities of raising awareness. This is one of the factors influencing how much women are informed and how much they're willing to report and talk about violence. So in that sense, every year we have the 16 days of activism. This year we decided to, during those 16 days of activism, we decided not to force these activities so much. We started this campaign of informing victims since March through our available services, where they can use the phone lines, where they can report the violence, and also to the police. EULEX helped us in that case with flyers, which we for example, during the curfew, we put up the flyers in the shops when people were not around, and we put those flyers in the entrances of the buildings, and we distributed them to the institutions. And also when cosmetic shops and barbers are opened, hair salons opened, we also, where women go often, we also put up the flyers there. So when the women walk by those shops, they will see the information. We are also very active on social networks because we faced the problem when the pandemic began. We were all confused and shocked, and we were wondering, what about the victims who are now enduring violence? They are closed down. They probably believe that this is not a priority now. This is a pandemic and they can't be a priority. Everybody's focused on COVID-19. So it was very important to inform all these victims that all institutions are working, that all services are available, that help is there, that they can ask for it, and that the support will be provided. We provide those services in line with the Istanbul Convention, which foresees that the service providers be provided by women's NGOs. We provide psychosocial support. During the pandemic, when the first wave hit us, we provided psychosocial support through telephone lines or online through the social networks, Instagram and Facebook messengers. And then as the measures were lightened up, we also started meeting them in person or by phone, depending on what was more convenient to the clients. In addition to the campaign of raising awareness, it is very important that we have adequate approach to preventing violence against women, when we have institutions who are doing their job properly, when we have institutions who solve violence cases efficiently, when we have victims of violence who go through this process and they say, yes, I went to the police, where I received all the services adequately. I went to the center where I properly received all the services, and I felt everywhere the way I should feel. Then the number of cases will grow. The women will start believing the institutions. And this is a problem that was researched by OSCE last year, showing that women did not trust institutions. So we have to work on building the trust between the institutions and the victims of violence. And that can only be reached if the institutions provide proper services so that women are encouraged to report the cases of violence. And by increasing the number of reporting violence, we will be able to reach more women. So this is a whole cycle. It is not enough only to inform them about available services if they do not receive the services appropriately.
Thank you, Tiana. Exactly, the famous
Hvala,
circle.
Tiana.
And every part of the circle definitely has to work in order for the whole circle to work optimally. And thanks a lot. This exhausted my questions. I see there was some activity ongoing in the chat. I don't know if
exchange of
Lyudisha
information.
exchange
information between Council of Europe and OSCE.
Yes, I think about the survey.
Survey.
It's interesting what Lubisha was mentioning, definitely, about the need also to change approach on how to outreach. And yes, Biljana, it's true. We have the well-being survey from OSCE, which I think was is what Tiana referred to earlier. Are there any other questions that any of you would like to pose to our amazing speakers?
Chiara,
Anyone?
I can explain.
You can
Yes.
either intervene or use the raise hands option.
No,
or
let's
chat,
intervene.
whatever.
I would like to talk if there is an open floor. Can I?
Yes, yes, yes. Go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Chiara. First of all, I want to congratulate to my EULEX
I
colleagues.
don't hear. Maybe Biljana wants to talk. No.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Do you hear me?
Or Lubisha or Biljana, if you want to intervene, feel free.
No,
Well,
we can hear you. I can hear you. I don't know why Chiara cannot hear you.
Chiara
sorry,
cannot hear me.
Chiara? Maybe now.
Are you on English channel, Chiara? Biljana,
English channel, yes.
are you on English channel, right?
When I'm on English channel now. Sorry. I was
okay.
I was listening.
Now I hear you.
Everybody's on English. You go,
Okay.
Biljana.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to congratulate Alina, Chiara, I think Valentina, all of the EULEX amazing colleagues that I have for the excellent discussion today. I just want to clarify for Lubisha. If you take into consideration the well-being and safety study that was developed last year, 2019, and the images report, and if you try to cross-analyze the data, which in the well-being and safety survey, we have the perspective of women which were subject to violence. In the images report, we have the attitudes of men toward gender equality. And there is one chapter that tackles the issue of the attitude of men on violence against women. You will be amazed of the stereotypes, of the problems, of the way the both genders, sexes, basically how they see differently violence. So Lubisha, I invite you just to go through it. If we do have some also background statistical data that were not processed, if you're interested, we can share it with you, especially on the men perspective. The second one that I put it in the chat. And you can always contact me. So I'm sorry for taking the floor on this, but I wanted to clarify.
No, it's fine. There is any follow-up on it, Lubisha said, from Council of Europe?
Well, we are monitoring, as Tiana said, there is a lot of untrust of women towards asking assistance, especially from police. It's only 2% of women would go and report to police, and it's only 3% of women that would go to Center for Social Welfare to ask for psychosocial support, for instance. That is something that survey is telling us, and that's why such a big pressure has been done. And that's why today we have EULEX discussing about the general and specialized services, because the survey, the baseline data shows you that it's a, let's say, weak, slaba karika. It's a weak spot.
Great.
Thank you so much, Biljana, for your intervention. I think it was.
If I can maybe build on what you said, very good. Actually, we are doing surveys, and NGOs are crying no money for services. So it's a huge gap in between. You know, we have to fill this space. This is the problem. Every year we have 1,500 cases, no decrease. So what we are doing with this awareness raising activities, I don't think that we are really having any effect, except of you know, gathering for 16 days and okay, having nice events, but no in-depth breakthrough. We are not changing mindsets of people. This is the problem of men.
I think it's a slow. I think it's a slow. You know, it's a progress that, and it's not one. You know, in the morning after we sorted out things out. So you know, it's a long term.
I work 15 years in this sector, not from yesterday.
Yeah, I know. It sometimes becomes frustrating, but doesn't mean that we should give up. And you know, and that's why we are here to try to coordinate and always find solution.
Absolutely, we have to continue, but to see some how to make it more effective, nothing else.
Yeah,
I have
thank you so much.
Friendly approach. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lubisha.
If
I
I may add on just quickly that, you know, as I said, we kind of started, you know, this 16 days of activism campaign the moment we got involved in this kind of activism, you know, many years ago. But as I mentioned, we went into, you know, awareness raising campaign with the information sharing and reaching out to women in March, and we haven't stopped throughout the year. But you know, 16 days of activism in a way kind of helps to cause this shock effect, you know, really quick by other actors who are not always, you know, who are not focused on this issue 12 months a year. So, you know, 16 days can contribute, but then we also, again, have this problem, as Ljubisha said, and I agree, you know, we don't have a long-term effect because it requires a you know, comprehensive, holistic approach, and we don't have that. It needs every aspect to be addressed, and we don't have that. If, you know, after the 16 days, if you go and look at the reporting to the media, like when the police gives statements to the media regarding domestic violence cases, there was a, you know, there was a domestic violence case, the police responded, and the case is in the procedure. That's where it ends. We never know if the perpetrator was arrested. We never know where is the victim. Is she in the house? Is he removed from the house? What's going on? We don't know any of that. And it's you know, it's kind of the same exact you know, way of reporting. It's exactly like I said. You know, the case happened, the police responded, the case is in procedure. That's all. And then we had one case of a domestic violence where the woman was a perpetrator. It happened a few months back, and besides the full names of both the perpetrator and the victim, we got the full name of a minor child and the minor child statement, all published in local media. When I called local media, I said, the only thing they didn't give you is the address. And they said, well, actually, they did give us the address, but we didn't want to publish it. So, you know, the approach to it and the way things are done after the 16 days or before the 16 days, when, you know, when the rest of us who focus on this issue work all the time, we are, you know, it's not enough. We have to address it holistically. It has to be addressed, how it's reported, how it's addressed, in what way the services are provided. And that's where the problem is.
Definitely. No, thank you, Tiana. Thank you, Ljubisha, for raising the issue. Definitely. Yes, Basri, please.
Only to complement this discussion. This database, which is within the Domestic Violence Coordinator's Office, all of the actors providing delivering services are included, and each one of them has the responsibility to input the data on the status of the case and to what extent the treatment of a victim has reached. So all the actors are involved in there. They have this information. It was also rightfully mentioned these 16 days of activism, or the week for victims' rights. During the Victims' Week, we had a very nice motto: 1 week of awareness raising and 360 days at the service of victims. So we only are involved in this awareness raising campaign for 1 week or 2, but then we are fully committed to delivering services throughout the year. During the awareness raising efforts, we try to get closer to the victims, to inform them where they can find us. But of course, we are at their disposal or service throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Basri, indeed. Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I don't know if Vesna wants to add something to the conversation. If not, maybe we can just have a very brief closing remark. No, I don't see any other questions. Vesna, yes, maybe Vesna wants to say something.
Zaista ne bih imala više šta.
I really don't think there is much more to say. Tiana, Basri, and Ljubisha said everything that needs to be said. There are obstacles and lacks, but we all have to work together to overcome them and do our part, respect the standards, improve the implementation of standards, and make sure our services are always on the adequate level, and that we try to make sure that more citizens know our services exist, that they know what they can expect from them, and that they can use those services at any time, as Basri said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That would be all.
Indeed. Thank you, Vesna. Also. So thanks a lot to everybody who participated, to our speakers. Thank you to all who participated. For me, it was really, I think for everybody, it's been a very empowering moment. And I just take one key message from this talk, which is the importance of all working together, of having an holistic approach, as it was mentioned several times, and to all work together. Indeed, we need to unite force and to strive for the long-term approach. So having said this, thank you again. Thank you. I wish we could stay here the whole day because this is also interesting, but thank you so much for taking part in this talk. Our aim is also to play bits of this talk on our social media to reiterate the messages that you all gave us and throughout the year, So what we just mentioned, that we have this campaign ongoing at the moment, but our work is throughout the whole year, 365 days. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you, Alina, also.
No, I just want to say that you should follow up us because we will have other talks upcoming.
Exactly, yes. And we will have other upcoming talks. The next one hopefully will be on Friday on access to justice also. So we will have a judge and a prosecutor. And also on Monday, we're planning another talk. I will inform you in due time about all of this. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you participating. Thanks, Lubisha. Thanks, Biljana, to all others. And see you soon. Have a nice afternoon and evening. Basri. Thank you, Tiana. Thank you, Vesna. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, bye, bye.